That summer, I thought my only job was to savor my last few weeks of freedom before college. To soak up the sun at the lakehouse with my best friend and cling to the simple, easy feeling of being young. But I was wrong. What happened that summer was something I never could have predicted. Something so intense, I can still feel the echo of it today. It all started as a normal trip, a tradition Benjamin and I had shared for years. But this time, the air felt different. A subtle shift, impossible to ignore. And at the center of it all was his father, Mr. Carter. Looking back, the signs were there. I just didn't know how to read them. I expected lazy afternoons, hikes, and late-night talks with Benjamin. It was supposed to be one last perfect stretch of normal before we left for college and everything changed. But from the moment I arrived, a new energy hung over the place. Maybe it was the looming future, forcing us to figure out who we were outside our childhood friendship. Or maybe it was something else, something quiet and powerful lurking just beneath the surface of every conversation. The lakehouse was as peaceful as ever, hidden deep in the woods where the only sounds were the wind in the trees and the gentle water against the dock. Benjamin's dad, Mr. Carter, had always been kind, treating me like family. But this time, his gaze felt different. It held a weight I didn't understand. I'd catch him watching me, his eyes lingering a moment too long, his smile hinting at a secret he wasn't sharing. He was in his mid-40s, with a quiet, solid confidence that filled a room. He was just my best friend's dad, the guy who told bad jokes at the grill. But that summer, my view of him began to blur, leaving me uneasy and confused. The feeling sharpened when Benjamin suddenly had to leave. "Claire needs help moving some stuff," he said, already grabbing his keys from the dock. "I'll be back in a few hours." I shrugged, trying to hide my disappointment at being left alone. "It's fine. I'll find something to do. My dad's around if you need anything," Benjamin called out as he jogged to his car. "You should try the new sauna. He's obsessed with it." Then he was gone, and a deep, heavy silence fell over the lake. The solitude I usually loved now felt charged and waiting. After a while, I decided he was right. The sauna sounded good. Maybe the heat could melt the tension tightening my shoulders since I'd arrived. It was a small, beautiful building nestled near the boathouse. Stepping inside was like walking into an embrace. Intense, dry heat wrapped around me, easing the knots in my muscles. I laid my towel on the bench, sat down, and let my head rest against the warm wood. For the first time all day, I finally let myself breathe. I'm not sure how long I sat there with my eyes closed, lost in the hum of the heater. Then the door creaked open. I turned, and there was Mr. Carter. Shirtless, a towel low around his waist, his skin already glistening. "Mind if I join?" he asked, his voice calm and easy, as if this were completely normal. My heart jumped. "Yeah. Of course," I managed. "It's his sauna," I told myself. "This is fine." He sat on the bench across from me, stretching out his arms. The space was small, and suddenly I was hyper-aware of every detail, the sound of his breathing, the shift of the wood under his weight. The heat felt heavier now, pressing down on us both. "You like the sauna?" he asked, his tone conversational. "Yeah," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "It's relaxing." He nodded slowly, his eyes holding mine. "It's good for tension. Helps you let go." I swallowed, wiping sweat from my forehead. "I can feel that." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. Electric. My skin prickled, and it wasn't from the heat. I shifted, and in that tiny movement, our knees brushed. Just for a second. The contact was light, almost accidental, but it jolted through me. He didn't pull away. "Just relax," he said, his voice a low murmur that vibrated in the thick air. "Let the heat do its work." I nodded, unable to speak, my mind racing. This is fine. This is normal. Then his hand moved. His fingers grazed my knee. It was subtle. Deliberate. A question, not a demand. My entire body went still. My breath caught in my throat. I should have moved. I should have said something. But I was frozen, trapped between confusion and a dizzying, terrifying thrill. The door was closed. We were completely alone. The heat was no longer relaxing. It was consuming. He leaned back, completely at ease, his towel loose, his confidence absolute. "You holding up okay?" he asked, his voice smooth as stone. I just nodded, unable to form words. He smiled slightly, a knowing look in his eyes. "It takes some getting used to," he said, leaning forward again until his face was closer to mine. "But once you do, it's easier to let things happen." His hand rested on my knee again, firmer this time. Not forcing. Just staying. My heart hammered against my ribs. I wasn't imagining this. The air was alive with meaning. Every instinct told me this was a line being crossed, and I was standing right on the edge. The heat was overwhelming my senses, making it impossible to think straight. "You're too tense," Mr. Carter murmured, his voice a low, intimate hum that vibrated through the thick air. "You have to learn to let go. You can't hold on to everything so tightly." I let out a shaky breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Before I could finish, his hand moved. The warmth of his palm pressed against my thigh. It was a deliberate, undeniable weight. My heart hammered against my ribs. I tried to tell myself it was a mistake, a misplaced gesture in the cramped space. But then he looked directly at me, and his gaze held a quiet, terrifying certainty. There was no accident in that touch. "I used to be like you," he continued, his voice steady and hypnotic. "Always in my head. Always holding back." His fingers traced a slow, deliberate line up my back. The lightest touch, but it sent a violent shiver through me, a stark contrast to the suffocating heat. I swallowed hard, my throat parched. "Mr. Carter, Relax," he murmured, cutting me off. His voice was soft but left no room for argument. "Just breathe." My entire body locked up as he shifted closer. The space between us vanished. I could feel the heat radiating from his skin, the warmth of his breath ghosting over my neck. Then, before my frozen mind could form a protest, he leaned in. His lips brushed against my shoulder, soft at first, just a whisper of contact. A second later, I felt the press of his mouth against my skin, a kiss that was unmistakable and intentional. A sharp, electric jolt shot through me. I gasped, lurching forward and scrambling for my towel. I have to go," I stammered, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out the hum of the heater. I didn't look back, pushing the sauna door open and stumbling into the shocking coolness of the outside air. It hit me like a physical blow. I stumbled, my head spinning from the temperature shift. My skin was slick with sweat, my breath coming in ragged, uneven gasps. I didn't stop until I was back inside the cabin, the door shutting behind me with a soft, final thud. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter, my hands trembling, trying to steady myself. My mind raced, scrambling for an explanation. That was my best friend's dad. He had kissed me. And for a horrifying second, I had been too stunned to move. A deep, sickening guilt twisted in my stomach. I felt like I couldn't breathe. My skin still burned where his lips had touched me, a ghost of a moment I was desperate to erase. I forced myself to move, to dry off and throw on fresh clothes before Benjamin returned. If he saw me like this, he'd know. And I wouldn't, let that happen. When Benjamin finally walked through the door, I was on the couch, pretending to scroll through my phone. "Hey man, you survive without me," he joked, tossing his keys onto the table. I forced a laugh that sounded hollow to my own ears. "Yeah, just hung out. Took your dad's advice and tried the sauna." Benjamin grinned. "Told you he's obsessed with that thing." I nodded, my muscles coiled tight. The moment his dad walked into the room, my entire body went rigid. Mr. Carter's eyes met mine for just a brief second, and a knowing, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. In that moment, with a cold certainty, I knew this was far from over. The days that followed were a special kind of torture. I tried to act normal, but every time Mr. Carter was near, my body betrayed me, heart pounding, breath catching. I avoided his eyes, but it was useless. I could feel his gaze on me, a constant, heavy pressure. At first, I thought if I just kept my distance, it would stop. I stayed glued to Benjamin's side, making excuses whenever Mr. Carter was near. But my avoidance only seemed to amuse him. Every time I dared a glance his way, he was smirking, a faint curve of his lips that said he knew exactly what game I was playing. And the touches didn't stop. A hand grazing the small of my back as he passed me in the kitchen. His arm brushing against mine on the porch. A palm resting on my shoulder for a moment too long. Each one was a tiny, deliberate violation, so subtle they were almost impossible to call out, but they screamed in the silence between us. Then came the comments. "You've been quiet lately," he said one morning while Benjamin was outside. "Something on your mind?" I shook my head too quickly. "Nope. Just tired." He hummed, his gaze dropping to my mouth before meeting my eyes again. "Tired, huh?" The way he said it made my skin crawl. I turned away, my face burning. Benjamin noticed. "Dude, are you good?" he asked one night by the fire pit. "You've been acting weird ever since we got here." I tried to laugh it off. "Nah, man. I'm fine." "You sure?" he pressed, frowning. "If my dad's being overbearing, just ignore him. He gets weirdly intense about things sometimes." Weirdly intense. The phrase echoed in my head. If only he knew. "I think I'm just stressed about college," I said, the lie tasting like ash. Benjamin seemed to accept it, but the relief was short-lived. The real problem wasn't Benjamin. It was his father. And the invisible thread of tension between us was pulling tighter. One afternoon, Benjamin got another call. "Claire's stuck in town without a ride," he sighed, grabbing his keys. "I'm gonna go get her. You cool here?" Every instinct screamed no. I wanted to beg him to stay, to not leave me alone in that house again. But that would raise questions I could never answer. So I forced a nod. "Yeah. All good." The second his car disappeared down the gravel drive, a cold dread settled deep in my stomach. I knew what was coming. I heard the slow, deliberate footsteps before I saw him. Mr. Carter stepped into view, shirtless, a towel slung over his shoulder. His eyes found mine, and a smirk played on his lips. "Perfect day for the sauna," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "You coming?" My throat went completely dry. Every cell in my body screamed at me to say no, to run, to hide. But a terrifying, curious part of me was frozen in place. I hesitated for one fatal second. It was all the invitation he needed. He turned and walked toward the sauna without a backward glance. And before I could stop myself, before I could even think, my legs were moving, following him. Inside, the heat was stifling, even more oppressive than before. It pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. Mr. Carter sat down, spreading his legs slightly, his towel hanging loose. He looked completely at ease, a king in his domain. I sat as far away as the small space would allow, my fingers gripping the wooden bench beneath me. The silence was deafening. Dots stretched between us, thick and heavy. The only sounds were the hum of the heater and the occasional drip of sweat hitting the wood. Then he shifted, his thigh pressing firmly against mine. This time, it wasn't an accident, and I didn't pull away. "See," he murmured, his voice a low, smooth vibration. "You're finally starting to relax." I swallowed hard, my head foggy from the heat, my thoughts slow and syrupy. Mr. Carter leaned in, his fingers grazing my knee in a slow, testing caress. I didn't stop him. That silent acceptance was all the permission he needed. He shifted closer, his breath warm on my skin. My pulse roared in my ears, my body frozen yet humming with a terrifying energy. His hand slid up my thigh, his grip firm and knowing. "Feels good, doesn't it?" he murmured. For one dizzying second, I thought I was going to let it happen. I wasn't sure I wanted to stop it. But then, a jolt of pure panic snapped me back to reality. I bolted up so fast I nearly tripped. I have to go," I stammered, snatching my towel with shaking hands. Mr. Carter didn't try to stop me. He just smirked, a look that said he knew this wasn't over. He knew I'd be back. And that was the most terrifying part. Because a heavy, twisting pressure had been building inside me for days. It left me restless and trapped, caught between what I knew was wrong and a desire I couldn't seem to extinguish. I wasn't sleeping. My mind was a broken record, replaying every glance, every whispered word, every electric touch. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in the sauna, feeling that oppressive heat, hearing his voice drop to a tone meant only for me. I told myself avoidance was the answer. If I just stayed close to Benjamin, it would all go away. But it didn't. It only made it worse, because Mr. Carter was acutely aware of the unspoken secret hanging between us. And he knew I would never be the one to break the silence. That knowledge gave him a confidence that made me sick. He didn't need to force a thing. He just had to wait. And I hated that he was right. The late afternoon sun cast long, accusing shadows across the cabin floor. I stood by the sink, gripping the countertop until my knuckles ached. Benjamin had left for town again. Another errand with Claire. I was alone. And I knew, with a cold certainty, what was coming. I heard the soft creak of footsteps behind me. Slow. Unhurried. I didn't turn. I didn't need to. My pulse spiked, my breath catching in my throat. "You seem nervous," Mr. Carter's voice was smooth, too casual, laced with amusement at my obvious tension. I forced a breath, trying to steady myself. "I'm not." He chuckled softly, stepping closer. Close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from him behind me. "Lying isn't a good look on you." His hand brushed my lower back, the lightest touch, but it sent a violent shiver down my spine. I flinched, but I didn't move away. I should have. I should have walked right out the door and waited on the gravel path for Benjamin. But I didn't. My inaction was a confession. "I'm heading to the sauna," he murmured, his voice a low, intimate invitation. "You should join me." I knew it wasn't a request. I should have said no. I should have ignored him. But a nervous heat was already blooming in my chest, a frantic energy coiling deep in my stomach. I swallowed hard, fighting a war inside my head. And yet, my feet moved before my mind could win. I followed him. The walk felt like moving through a dream. The humid outside air was nothing compared to the wall of heat that hit us as we stepped inside. The small space felt microscopic now, the walls pressing in, the tension suffocating. I sat down, my body a tightly wound spring, my heart hammering against my ribs. Mr. Carter sat across from me first, stretching out his legs, the picture of ease. He watched me for a long, heavy moment, his gaze unreadable. Then he leaned back, his towel riding low. A single drop of sweat traced a path down his chest. And I hated that I couldn't look away. "You've been avoiding me," he stated, his voice calm but firm. I swallowed, my throat like sandpaper. "I haven't." Another smirk. Another knowing look that saw right through me. "You have. But it's okay. I knew you'd come around." I opened my mouth to argue, to deny it with everything I had. But before a sound could escape, he moved. In one smooth motion, he was sitting beside me. The heat between us was suddenly a living thing. My body locked up, but I didn't pull away. I should have stood up. I should have walked out. But I didn't. His fingers brushed my knee, light and testing. When I didn't flinch, he let his hand rest there, the warmth of his palms seeping into my skin. His thumb began to move, tracing slow, deliberate circles on my leg. "You can tell me to stop," he murmured, his eyes locked on mine. I didn't. His touch grew bolder, his fingers sliding higher, pressing firmer. My breath hitched. I felt lightheaded, the heat blurring every line between wrong and right, between fear and want. Then his mouth was at my ear, his breath a warm whisper against my skin. "You don't have to fight it." Something inside me shattered. I turned my head slightly, and before I could think, before I could stop myself, his lips were on mine. It wasn't hesitant. It was firm, confident, like he had known this was inevitable from the start. And the worst part, the part that will haunt me forever, is that I kissed him back. I didn't run. I didn't fight. The heat, the sweat, the weight of his hands on me, it all melted together, drowning out every other thought. There was no outside world. There was only this. Only him. His hands slid up my arms, pulling me closer. And I let him. I let myself get lost in the way his mouth moved against mine, in the way his fingers gripped my waist like he would never let go. My pulse roared, my head spinning from the heat and the overwhelming sensation of his touch. In that moment, I didn't care about Benjamin, or the guilt, or the consequences. All that mattered was the feeling. I had been drowning for days. And for the first time, I stopped fighting the current. Then, a sound. The sharp creak of the sauna door opening. My heart stopped. I tore myself away, breathless, pure panic surging through my veins. Mr. Carter didn't move at first, his expression unreadable. Then, footsteps. Someone was outside. Reality crashed down on me like ice water. Benjamin. I scrambled up, grabbing my towel, stumbling toward the door. My hands shook as I fumbled for the handle. Mr. Carter simply exhaled slowly, his gaze still locked on me, calm and composed amidst the disaster I had created. I knew better. I had crossed a line. And there was no going back. I barely made it out without falling apart. My legs were weak, my skin burning with more than just heat. The cool air felt like a slap. I didn't stop moving. I had to get away. Benjamin was already inside, rummaging through the fridge, completely oblivious to the earthquake that had just ripped through my world just feet away. "You good?" he asked without looking up. "You look kind of out of it." I forced a nod, wiping sweat from my brow. "Yeah. Just overheated. In the sauna." He shrugged. "Told you my dad's obsessed with that thing. You gotta be careful, man. That heat messes with your head." If only he knew. I muttered something about a shower and rushed to the bathroom, locking the door and pressing my hands against the sink. My reflection stared back, wide-eyed, wrecked. My lips were still tingling. My body still hummed with the phantom feeling of his hands. I needed to leave. It was the only answer. If I stayed, I knew this wouldn't stop. No matter how much I told myself it was wrong, I knew I was lying. But when night fell, I was still there. Every time I picked up my phone to make an excuse, my fingers froze. I didn't have a reason that wouldn't sound suspicious. And deep down, a treacherous part of me knew the real reason I hadn't left. I was waiting. And when the soft knock came at my door, I already knew who it was. I lay frozen under the covers, my breath trapped in my throat. The lock was engaged, but it felt flimsy. I could hear Benjamin's light snoring from the next room. The risk should have petrified me. But I didn't move. The knock came again. Quieter. A silent, undeniable invitation. I squeezed my eyes shut, every nerve screaming at me to stay put. But then my legs were moving. My hand was turning the lock. And before I could stop myself, I was pulling the door open. Mr. Carter stood in the dim hallway, wearing only sweatpants, the shadows carving lines across his chest and arms. His eyes found mine, dark and waiting. I could have slammed the door. I should have. Instead, I stepped back. He slipped inside, shutting the door behind him with a soft, final click. The air between us was electric, a storm finally breaking. I could feel the heat coming off his skin before he even touched me. And when he did, when his fingers skimmed my wrist, then settled on my waist, I didn't pull away. I let him. The breath I'd been holding escaped in a shudder as he moved closer. His palms slid up my bare chest, his touch slow, deliberate, and utterly claiming. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. My back met the bed as he pressed forward, and the last thread of my resistance quietly snapped. The morning after, the world looked exactly the same, but I was completely different. Sunlight streamed through the cabin windows. Benjamin laughed at something on his phone, talking about how much he'd missed this place. The air still smelled of pine and coffee. Everything was normal. But I wasn't. I sat on the edge of my bed, my hands trembling slightly, a heavy, sick feeling churning in my stomach. I hadn't slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I was right back there. I could still feel the weight of his gaze, still hear the whispers in the dark, promises he never had to say out loud because I already knew. I was trapped in a secret I didn't know how to hold. And the worst part? Mr. Carter knew it. At breakfast, he was the picture of calm. He joked with Benjamin like nothing had changed, like the world hadn't tilted on its axis last night. He was completely unbothered. And every time I dared a glance his way, he was already watching me. Waiting. The worst part wasn't the pretending. It was the terrifying knowledge that he didn't have to pretend. He knew I would never say a word. That night, Benjamin wanted one last bonfire. One last night under the stars before we left for college and everything changed. I wanted to say no. My every instinct screamed to hide in my room, to put as much space between me and Mr. Carter as possible. But I didn't. I went. We sat around the flames. Benjamin talked about his dreams for the future, completely unaware of the war raging inside me. I nodded, I smiled at the right times, but my skin was crawling. Because all the while, I could feel Mr. Carter's eyes on me. A casual brush of his hand against my back as he passed me a drink. A glance that held for a second too long, filled with a meaning only I understood. His knee pressing against mine beneath the table, a silent, terrifying reminder. This isn't over. When the fire died down and Benjamin went to bed, I thought I'd made it. I thought I'd survived the night. But as I walked up the stairs to my room, I heard a floorboard creak behind me. I didn't turn. I didn't need to. He didn't touch me. He didn't need to. He just leaned in close, his voice a low whisper that seeped right into my soul. You'll think about me when you're gone. My entire body went rigid, frozen on the spot. Then, his fingers traced a slow, deliberate line down my arm, a ghost of a touch that felt like a brand. And then he was gone, stepping back into the shadows as if he'd never been there at all. I stumbled into my room and locked the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. But the lock felt useless. Because he was right. I would think about him. This secret would follow me long after I left this place. The next morning, I packed my bag in a daze. Each item I folded away felt like burying a piece of myself. Benjamin was in the next room, still blissfully unaware that his best friend and his father shared a secret that could shatter his world. As I zipped the bag closed, a cold, hard truth settled in my chest. This wasn't just a summer fling I could forget. This was a ghost I would carry with me. I couldn't tell Benjamin. Not now. The words wouldn't form. The guilt was a physical weight, crushing me from the inside. But I knew, with a certainty that terrified me, that secrets like this don't stay buried forever. They fester. They grow. And one day, they demand to be heard. So I have to ask you, what would you do? If you were holding a truth that could destroy your closest friendship, could you ever find the courage to speak it? Or would you bury it forever, and let it change who you are? Let me know in the comments. I could really use the advice.